conversation for this morning as we get an update as to what is taking place in the courts in terms of the redistricting. We have with us, joining us via Zoom actually, Andrew Marshalleck, who is one of the interested parties, and Arthur Saldivar, who is the claimant, and they are both attorneys, of course, in this case. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
So, gentlemen, it seems that COVID has consumed all of our thoughts at this time, but there's so much more that's taking place, and we know that the redistricting case is still before the court, and very critically, we're looking at an upcoming election in just a few months. So let's start off with an update as to where we are.
Well, we have had the application recently for the appointment of an expert, which was brought on by the interested party, who my learned friend, Senior Counsel Andrew Marshalleck, represents. The expert has now, I believe, 30 days or so to prepare a report. And once that report is prepared and submitted to the court, we go back to continue this process. I'll have Mr. Marshalleck take it from there.
Yeah. Well, since last week, we've been making arrangements to engage the expert and to get him going. Mm-hmm. We're hoping to have a report ready for when court reopens in September.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about the expert that you wanted to bring on to the case, what is the expertise that they're going to be bringing?
He's a political scientist.
Mm-hmm.
There are also demographers involved. It's a specialist area. Mm-hmm. It's mainly demographers.
Yeah. I know you don't want to give out too much of the details as to what you're working on. I just wanted to be able to understand that in putting together this case, there is what the law says, which is very clear about how our constituencies should be divided. But of course, what we hear in terms of those who are saying it's not possible is things like time, things like resources, and even political will. How do you challenge statements like that?
Well, allow me to say.
Go ahead.
Allow me to say, at this present time, we're having ourselves a Star Trek moment. Star Trek was a show from the 1960s. And no one would have thought back then that we would be in a position right now remotely to have video conferencing the way we're having it right now. So when we're talking about technology and advancement of technology, it is certainly very much within the realm of possibility to have this job be done before the next general election. So let's get that out of the way. The time factor is not really a factor at all, present technology permitting. Now, in relation to the question that you had asked earlier, Marlene, in terms of what is the remit of the expert, again, everything is documented. All parties know what the expert is going to do. Mm-hmm. He shall perform a report, be instructed to gather the most recent data available showing the names and addresses of all registered voters in Belize in every existing electoral division as defined by the provisions of Schedule 1 of the Representation of the People Act of Belize, and to analyze the data and prepare a written report offering an objective view as to whether the electoral divisions as presently defined and constituted are sufficiently equal or malapportioned to assess the impact of any malapportionment and to identify and quantify discriminatory effects, if any, arising therefrom. So in essence, this is a case of discrimination. It's voter discrimination that we are looking to address in terms of eliminating that as it exists right now in Schedule 1 of the Constitution. And you know, the discrimination is something that is abhorrent to anyone and everyone. And where it exists, we seek to stamp it out. We are saying that it exists in the present composition of the electoral divisions because we have some that are very small and some that are very, very huge. This has not come before the court before. So in the past, we've had elections based on this unconstitutional state of affairs. But now that it's before the court, it is incumbent upon the court in its duty to safeguard the Constitution to address it.
Now, we have with us Paul Morgan, who is a member of the Belize Peace Movement, and he too perhaps is one of the claimants as well. The Constitution, if I'm not mistaken, would have it clear that every so often, every so many years, that there should be this redistricting exercise to reapportion the respective electoral districts. Mr. Morgan, tell me how the idea came about to initially challenge this position that, you know, these many years have since gone by and the government of the day did not seek to commence this process.
Okay, good morning, Isani. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Anna, Marlene. Good morning, Belizeans. It's a pleasure. First of all, I know it's early morning. Let me wish each and every one listening, at home and abroad, blessed day. And with that, I wish to respond to you, Isani, that it has been a long struggle. Today, I would like to speak to you about the background, what you asked about, and in particular, the benefits to Belizeans of this case. The attorneys here will tell us what's going on, all of the funny words they use in courts, but I will tell you why this will benefit Belize. So the background is very simple. It is about national development. It is about the price of freedom. You see, without representation, it's an issue of representation, and without representation, proper representation, this nation will never be united. Arthur spoke about discrimination, and indeed we can put it in some of the vilest terms, and I'm sure Belizeans will agree. But for sanity's sake, I will say, yes, it is about discrimination. Our people are not equal from north to south, from east to west. We are not treated equal, and we all know it. We just don't want to speak about it. So representation will lead us to national unity. National unity will allow us to come together to produce. If we are a productive nation, then we can raise good families. If we can raise good families, then we will have social justice in our country. That is the background. And this background has been put together way back in 2000 and 2006, when the vision inspired by the people put together this document. This document called the Direction of the Parties, the only written direction in Belize by a political organization. Yes, the European Unity have their manifesto, but none could brag to say that we have a direction that the people of Belize can pick up. I would wish that the people of Belize call at this point in time to look at this direction, to take a look at it, the media, take a look at it again. It was written in 2006. So to answer your question directly now, this issue is about representation, and it is about the price of freedom. We need to be able to get our people together in order that we begin the development process. I will speak about the benefits of it later.
Gentlemen, when you look at the current situation, I believe most politicians have acknowledged that there is a need for redistricting. The issue here is about getting it done. And that's why I asked the question earlier about political will, because we're looking at just a few months potentially before the next election. I imagine it'll be argued that to be able to do a redistricting exercise at this time may be confusing for some, may be unfair for some, may leave them in a particular situation where people may have to move from, well, they would. Some people would be moved from one constituency to another. How do you respond to those types of concerns?
I think that the anticipation of chaos is a little bit unwarranted, in that I've seen Belizeans do amazing things. I've seen us respond to very complicated questions in referendum. I've seen us do a whole lot of wonderful things. In fact, just to make light of it, I've seen even our vagrants are not putting on masks because they understand that we don't want to pay $5,000 for not wearing a mask. So no, I wouldn't underestimate the ability of Belizeans to respond and to act properly in a redistricting situation as quickly as this may be. But I want to say this. I've heard that time and time again, and I think it is high time to nail the issue about timing. And I want to bring in focus what the People's United Party has been saying about this, exactly that we don't have time and that they will conduct the redistricting 1 year after they get into office. Well, let me tell you something. If we don't get it now, and I want Belizeans to listen carefully, if we don't get this now, then it won't be until another 5 years after the election cycle that we can get it again. So the offer to do this 1 year after being elected is really, really disingenuous. And I would like to call out the People's United Party, the leader and all followers to understand that if we do not do this now, the chance is lost until the next election, because once the election is run, we will not be able to say switch divisions again.
No, let's look at it from a practical point of view here, in terms of what the desired effect would be and what the net effect of it all will spell. You're looking at a constituency such as Fort George, for instance, which is a relatively small constituency compared to Stann Creek West, on the other hand. But when you look at the number of available seats in Belize City versus a constituency as expansive as Stann Creek West, which only has one area representative, what does the redistricting exercise mean in that context?
Yeah.
For me, it will mean, and for all Belizeans, it should mean fairer representation. Yeah. What we will have is the Elections and Boundaries Commission, along with the Elections and Boundaries Department, who I trust are professional enough to understand logistics, will bring the people who are nearest to their polling area, a polling station, and make the elections quite possible, quite feasible, quite workable. The question that you asked is, well, how will it work? It shouldn't work any different than an ordinary election. I can't see why it should be different. A person in Fort George can easily walk to his polling station, regardless of where that is within Fort George. A voter in Stann Creek West generally has to get a ride, and it is the politician who provides these rides. Maybe this exercise would bring a little bit of sanity to the whole situation, where we build more polling stations, we put more people to get the vote. So I think it will be better, not worse.
So, and I think we've had opportunities before where you can outline that it takes 5 people in an area like Stann Creek West, I think, to be able to equate to 1 voter in some place like Fort George. It's clear that the redistricting exercise was necessary a long time ago. So what you're trying to do is going through the courts to force the Elections and Boundaries Commission, the relevant parties, to go ahead and do the exercise. So let me ask in terms of, if you were successful in this case, how do you ensure that the ruling is followed through upon? Because it can be that, yes, it is determined that it is necessary to do the redistricting case, but once again, it can be decided that it could be after the next election.
No. Well, no, it really can't, Marlene. It cannot. The Constitution requires that the election and boundaries make recommendation to Parliament as it relates to the malapportionment if it exists. Which means that you cannot have a valid general election on an unconstitutional state of affairs where that issue has been brought before the court.
Yeah.
So what that means, because apart from the malapportionment, you're talking about the discriminatory effect which affects the Section 6 fundamental rights and freedom of every voter, which has to be dealt with. I mean, the Unibam case made that very clear, that you cannot have such a violation and ignore it. It has to be addressed. Which means you cannot, on the one hand, say like the PUP has done, that yes, there is a need to do this, but we are going to let this unconstitutional state of affairs ride until the election is over. No. Once that is identified and acknowledged as being existent by the courts, there is no discretion on the part of Parliament to address the problem. First, it is for the election and boundaries to make the proposal, then it is for Parliament to give the remit to the election and boundaries department to go through the exercise to eliminate the discriminatory effect of the malapportionment. Once that is done, we can go into a constitutional election for the first time in 15 years.
Now let me ask this. Would the present situation regarding COVID-19 be an elephant in the room in regards to the possible outcome in the courts? Because even if the court, for instance, rules that yes, this exercise must be conducted ahead of any general elections to come, but we're in the throes of the pandemic, then doesn't that then create an issue in and of itself?
No, Isani. In fact, the pandemic actually makes it better for our situation.
Okay.
Because we need to have more time for our health sector to catch up and be able to manage and mitigate against the spread of the disease. We don't want to have a situation right now where we are forced to put people out there on the streets to be in close contact with each other, lining up in queues to vote in an election where a pandemic may actually take root and spread like wildfire. So this may be the most fortuitous circumstance for all and sundry in terms of having a delay that we need at this time to address the constitutionality of the process to allow for constitutional elections when it can occur constitutionally.
Perhaps for clarity, it would help if you'd be able to explain what the process would be for redistricting, because when we think of exercises of this nature, we may imagine that there's a lot of person-to-person contact, but in fact, redistricting seems to be more of a paper exercise, something you're doing with what currently exists. Do you want to outline how a redistricting in what you are proposing could be done?
Allow my learned friend to come in. He is there. Let him also have his say on this, please.
It's open. You can speak as you feel fit. Go ahead.
Well, it's very simple. You amend the schedule to the Representation of the People Act to redefine the constituencies. That's what it is.
So you're essentially looking at a map of the various constituencies, the electoral districts, and you're basically redefining the map.
The boundaries.
Yes, that's all it is. So you would simply insert a new schedule into the Representation of the People Act. And the question, just to backtrack a little, the question is really whether or not the state of the electoral registers are such that elections can be held in accordance with the Constitution. Because if they're not, then what you're talking about is going forward with a farce.
So that's your argument about waiting, having to wait until after the election?
No, it's not an argument. What it is that the Constitution, the elections are held in accordance with the Constitution. And if given this current state of the electoral registers, an election in accordance with the Constitution is not possible, then how do you go forward?
Well, we have seen over time where this has been the status quo, and it has continued in previous elections.
Yes, and we've seen 1.5 billion spent without authorization and unconstitutionally as well, doesn't make it any better, does it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, the thing about it, Marlene and Isani, is that prior to now, this matter has not been brought before the court.
Yes.
The court has a constitutional mandate, you see, and that constitutional mandate is to ensure that the Constitution, which is the supreme law in Belize, is complied with. So before, when it was never challenged, the ruling parties had their way and pushed through unconstitutional elections. Now they're coming and saying that they respect the Constitution, but their actions have shown otherwise. Because if they had respected the Constitution, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So we are here now. And by virtue of being here now, for the first time in a long time, the Belizean people will have a chance to finally have fair representation and free and fair elections.
Yeah.
We'll also see a marked difference in the delineation of all 31 constituencies as well, correct?
Correct.
What you'll see is
Might, not necessarily.
are redistricting, just based on the numbers here, to balance back off the state of things, would require the reduction of some 4 seats in the Belize district, an increase of 1 in Orange Walk, an increase of 1 in Cayo, an increase of 1 in Stan Creek, and an increase of 1 in Punta Gorda. And that would roughly balance it back off.
And it would be the same,
That's just straight mathematics.
it would be the same number of representatives.
Politically, however, if you look at the lay of the land in a manner of speaking, the ruling party has the most number of seats in Belize City, and if we're saying that 4 of those constituencies will go elsewhere, then that essentially splits it up, correct?
Well, that is exactly what we're saying here. The Constitution replaced the monarch in 1981, and the Constitution was not built for the conveniences of political parties. It was built for the convenience of the people.
Okay. Let's get your way in before
Actually,
we go. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can, Isani, what the Constitution really rests on is the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights, because that's what we're talking about. Article 21 provides that everyone has the right to take part in government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. And 3 says the will of the people shall be the basis of authority of the government. Our Constitution uses similar language. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage. What equal suffrage means is equal votes of equal value. So what you're talking is about the fundamental human right of each of us to participate in our government. And it is not right for 2,000 people in Queen Square or 1,800 people in Fort George to get to elect a representative, but yet it takes 10,000 people in Stan Creek West to get the same elected representative. That is just simply not equal votes of equal value. In fact, when you do the maths, one has 5 times the weight of the other. That state of malapportionment goes to the root of whether or not what we hold here can really be called democratic elections. It's something else. It's dressed up like it. It wears the garb. It uses the language. We go through the motions. But is it really democratic when you run elections based on electoral registers with those kinds of discrepancies?
And
there's also a further implication as well in terms of how resources are distributed. And I think that's a great point. We're going to come back on that one. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about what the current situation does in terms of being able to equitably share resources across the country. That's coming up after the break.
When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Channel 5 introduces the Daily Obituaries. the daily obituaries will broadcast all death and funeral announcements and memorials to honor your loved one's life and memories. The daily obituaries airs on Channel 5 prior to the evening newscast, with subsequent repeats at 10 p.m. and 12 noon the following day. It will also be placed online on our social media platforms, all for a standard package fee. Celebrate their lives and memories with Channel 5's daily obituaries. Honor in life and reverence in death.
And we are back, and we are continuing our conversation about the redistricting case and getting the latest update from the Belize Peace Movement and the attorneys involved. We do want to let you know that we are some of the Belizeans who I believe just
Felt the tremors.
Just
What
now.
appears to have been an earthquake.
Yes, so we're looking to get the details as to where it was and provide that to you as soon as we can. But so if you felt it, you're not alone. The rest of us felt it as well. But we're continuing with this conversation, which in itself would be a major shakeup for what we're accustomed to here in Belize. And I wanted to talk about some of the practical examples here. Whoever feels fit to weigh in. Because when we talk about redistricting, as we did with re-registration, oftentimes the public doesn't necessarily join in, even though they are the most affected based on these types of decisions. So let's talk about where you can give practical examples of how the disproportional representation affects people within their own rural area, urban area, or wherever it is.
Let me start with that, addressing that question very quickly, Maria.
Yeah.
Before answering such a question, it is important that we understand what the role and function of the representative is. And I will propose to you that few, in fact, even the representatives themselves, have not really, well, they don't receive a job description, and they have not really thought carefully about what their role is. And so, just to put some issues up front, I will give you a few roles that these people play, and then from there we can attach the costs to it. First of all, an area representative is a lawmaker. Second, he's a facilitator to the goods and services that government has to offer. Third, he's an educator. He communicates. He should, or she should, be explaining to the people what government is all about and what government business is doing. Third, he's generally a ceremonial dignitary. And finally, a counselor. What I want to say now is that a representative is the person that puts the voter in the place that he or she should be in government. He presents the position of the voter. And so now, with all of these issues, we can now attach costs to those things and benefits, and you will see that there is a great benefit to representation when the fewer the voters, the more perfect, the more efficient the representation to government will be.
Forgive me, and I don't want to be dismissive of the position you've taken. I honestly believe that it's very fair. However, it may seem somewhat idealistic if we would say that our area representative, as we see him or her today, is an educator, a counselor, a ceremonial dignitary, as you've mentioned, a lawmaker. While yes, there are certain functions that are carried through in Parliament, on the ground, in the respective constituencies, in some instances, these persons are everything else but those specific descriptions that you just mentioned, Paul.
You are correct, Isani, you are correct, that in theory, this is what they should be doing. That's what I described.
Yeah.
In practice, they are not representing people. You hit the nail on the head. They are representing their parties. And as such, when they represent their parties, then they will not be functioning these capacities that I mentioned. So the idea is, remember I started, this case is about representation. The fewer, the better. And you cannot say that the lawmakers at this point in time, the representatives, are putting the people in places where they should be, that is in government. They are actually representing their parties, and that is what is making things corrupt. This case is only the first shot at bringing sensible government to Belize. Yeah. We have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. To address it as well, Marlene and Isani, just consider the situation of the classroom, where you have classrooms of 40 against classrooms of 20 students, and the problem teachers face when they have overcrowded classrooms. You have students who are not getting proper instruction, who are not able to keep up because they don't get the one-on-one attention from the teacher and that type of thing. So the drive has always been to make more classrooms and to make the classrooms smaller, right? So that the teachers can effectively impart knowledge to students. Well, juxtapose that with your constituencies. Yeah. A constituency of 1,500 persons, where the representative has 2 or 3 streets to meet his voters, gets better representation theoretically than one of 8,000 or 9,000 voters spread out over 20 or so villages. Yeah. So in that context, you can see where the discriminatory effects lies. Now you can also look at the apportionment of resources,
of course,
where you have each representative getting a fixed sum of money, as a constituency vote or whatever they call it. I think it's about $7,000, right, to manage their constituency office and also to address issues impacting their constituencies. Well, in Fort Georgia, $7,000 will go much further than in Burmapan, where you have more than 8,000 persons. So on that fixed scale, you are finding that the resources are not adequately apportioned to address the needs of the bigger constituencies. And on the other hand, you had the whole situation where this government, in terms of its squandering of the Petro-Caribe funds, used those monies to buy ham and turkey for Christmas, right? Now, you had a fixed number of ham and a fixed number of turkey. Now, let's say you had 1,500 hams. I don't know how many hams they had to give out, but let's just take that amount. Everybody in Fort George would have been able to get a ham. Everybody in Queen Square would have been able to get a ham. But in Burmapan, they would have to cut that ham into 5 parts. And each person would get a part of a ham, 20% of a ham. That's basically what would have happened in Burmapan if everybody was supposed to get a piece of ham. So in Burmapan and Sand Creek West, they would get pieces, while in Burmapan, the family would get the whole ham. So this is basically, just to use the practical analogy of the discriminatory effect, that is basically where we are.
No, and I know it sounds like a funny example when you talk about the ham, but that's essentially what it is. Because the 2 levels of resources, well, 2 kinds, I should say, of resources that would be distributed among constituencies. One is their actual allocation, but also, and I was using the example of like the Christmas cheer, sharing the Christmas cheer in a smaller constituency, which is clearly a political decision because it's marked along party lines as well. But even so, sharing that type of money in one constituency in Belize City, for example, is completely different than sharing it in what tends to be some of the other, the larger areas as well. So I needed that example because I think it's important for viewers and voters to understand that it's not just all politics. And it's not just looking at how some people have secure seats and it's going to shake things up for them, make them work harder to be able to get their voters, but because it is actually a situation where their individual needs and lives can be affected. But let me get back to another issue. If this case is successful and you are able to get the redistricting exercise conducted, what are your concerns in terms of the autonomy of the Elections and Boundaries Commission to be able to effectively fulfill this mandate? Because we know that it is very possible in a situation like this, not saying it's going to happen, but possible, that you have the new boundary lines being drawn along preferable areas and allowing for gerrymandering right here in Belize. So what are your concerns there, and how can we circumvent it?
As claimants, Marlene, we cannot overreach with this case. We can only ask the court to tell the Elections and Boundaries to do its job. How they do their job is left to another situation. We might just well be back in court. Maybe it's not the peace movement and the 10 claimants who will be back in court complaining about what they do. But in this case, I would rather stay away from that as a claimant, no? Maybe the attorneys could weigh in on that issue. But as a claimant, we are here to ask the court to declare Section 6 unconstitutional, to tell the Elections and Boundaries to do their job, and that's about it. We can only help so far right now.
I think, Marlene, if it could have been gerrymandered, it would have been gerrymandered already. I think when you look at the numbers, there's no convenient way of doing it for any of the parties, which is precisely why nobody is doing it.
Okay.
Exactly. Again, look at what's going to have to happen. It's about numbers. It's not about geography, really. It's about numbers. Now, you have Fort George and Pickstock. They're small divisions and they border each other. You have Mesopotamia and Queen Square, small divisions bordering each other. If you were to amalgamate those two to make one, that's 2 divisions, right? Now, that's basically going to leave Belize City with 8 electoral seats, but we still need 2 more. So what would more than likely happen in terms of the numbers is to put Caribbean Shores, Pickstock, and Fort George together, put Albert, Mesopotamia, and Queen Square together to get 2 electoral seats out of those 6, and then the remaining 4 would be combined. So you'd have 6 seats in Belize City. That is more practical. Now, what that means is that certain politicians and political legacies would be lost. But that is not the concern of the Constitution, nor the concern of the people of Belize, really. What concerns the Constitution is that it is put in its rightful place for us in terms of the supreme law of the land. And what concerns the Belizean people is proper representation, so that the resources of the nation can be properly distributed in the interest of development across the country.
No, that's very, very objective, Arthur. Very objective.
That's what I try to be, my brother.
Right? But the thing is, though, these issues are guided by parties that have their own interests at heart, and parties form government. I guess that is the reason why we are where we are we not?
Well, again, yes and no. You see, the genesis of corruption in our system, Isani, is the unregistered political entity that we know as political parties in Belize. And it is a challenge, it's a direct challenge to the supremacy of the Constitution. But it can only remain that way for as long as we do not exercise our right to have the Constitution be put in the position it needs to be by coming to the court with these questions. So insofar as what has occurred in the past, we need to appreciate that it's a new day now. We are seeking to bring the issues that impact and mitigate against our democratic rights to the forefront and have the proper mechanism address it the way it should be addressed. This may upset the apple cart in terms of the status quo that exists, but it's for the better.
I foresee that as clear as the decision will be when the Supreme Court hands down one, it will be a divisive issue on either side of the political floor when you would have to reduce the number of candidates on a particular ballot in Belize City. Do you foresee that as well, Arthur or Andrew?
I think it's not about the convenience of either political party. It's about respecting the rights of voters. And that there will be inconvenience, certainly. But that shouldn't be the driving consideration. That there will be foot dragging, certainly. That there will be excuses, there have been for decades. That will continue. But the effort seeks to nudge the whole electoral practice in the direction where it belongs, back towards ideals, because we've strayed off course, and a course needs to be corrected. Now, I don't know, it is not for me to decide how to do that it needs to be nudged back on course. That's our role here. They will have to sort it out, and they will have to put it back on course.
Okay. So tell us about your expectations moving forward.
Where we are is that we'll get the expert report in another month or so. I expect, well, I don't want to preempt it in any way. The experts will do what they do and will generate an objective position, and we'll be able to appreciate just how off course we are. I think it's fair to say, given the disparities between the smallest and the largest constituencies, the extreme disparities, and that would be between Fort George and Stanquick West. One is about 1,800, 2,000, and the other is at 10,000 registered voters. There, we have to acknowledge that there are wide disparities. We also have to acknowledge that that must be fixed.
Yeah. All right. And just, do you think it is possible for the redistricting exercise to be done before November?
Yes, we've cited a number of instances where it has been done internationally within a matter of weeks, just before elections. It's actually a very common practice for governments to say we don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
The elections is upon us. We've seen that argument run in the US, in Canada. It's been run everywhere. It's really quite typical and unimaginative to say that we just don't have time to do it, even though you've been warned about it in the OAS reports for the past decade. Yeah. Still, a third election is upon us because they were warned for the last two elections that it needed to be done. Yeah. Third one is now upon us, nearly 15 years later, and we're still saying we don't have time. Clearly, you'll never have time to do it. It's not something that that they want to do. They're comfortable with the way the lines are drawn, and I can understand that. But from a legal perspective, there is an issue. The disparities cannot be ignored, and they must be addressed, however inconvenient addressing them will be.
Absolutely. Fair. All right. Well, thank you for providing this latest update for us this morning. And of course, we'll keep on monitoring the case. We appreciate it.